Robert was an experienced truck driver, accustomed to always driving the same stretch. He knew every curve, every hill, and even the potholes in the road well. He knew who the drivers were who usually took that route. He waved to some and chatted briefly with others at the rest stops. The routine was always the same. Until that night. The trip was going smoothly when he realized that he was low on fuel. He decided to stop at the next gas station, an old, abandoned one that was on the side of the road, away from the main traffic. He had stopped there before, but always during the day. At night, the place seemed much darker. When he parked, he noticed something that made his heart race. There was another truck there. It wasn't just any truck. It was identical to his. Same model, same color, the same small dents in the bodywork. The only difference was the empty body. But the engine was still warm. Robert got out hesitantly, feeling an unexpected chill down his spine. The wind howled between the deactivated gas pumps. He looked around, trying to find someone, but the station seemed completely deserted. He decided to approach the truck. When he climbed onto the step to look out the window, he felt a deep shiver. In the rearview mirror of the cabin, he saw his reflection. But his face wasn't there. It was just an empty spot, without eyes, without mouth, without identity. An absolute void where his tired expression should have been. Panic took over. He quickly turned to the window of the parked truck and, for an instant, saw his own image reflected in it. But he wasn't standing outside. He was inside the cabin, sitting behind the wheel. His other self raised his head and smiled. A wide, sinister smile. Before Robert could react, the truck's engine roared loudly. The headlights came on and illuminated the abandoned gas station with a blinding light. The other him accelerated, pulling away violently, throwing dust everywhere. Robert took a step back, confused and terrified. The identical truck disappeared into the dark road, leaving only the silence and the echo of the engine moving away. His heart was racing, and his mind was trying to process what had just happened. When he looked again in the rearview mirror of his own truck, he realized that his face had not yet returned. The empty shadow was still there. Fear took over him completely. And then a cold thought ran through his mind. What if the other him had taken his place? John was an experienced truck driver, accustomed to long, lonely trips along country roads. That night, while driving along a deserted highway, he felt suddenly tired. The last few hours had been monotonous, with not a single car crossing his path. The streetlights were spaced out and cast long, distorted shadows on the asphalt. The clock on the dashboard read 2:43 a.m. He decided to pull over on a small shoulder to rest. He got out of the cab, stretched out his arms, and pulled a pack of cigarettes from his shirt pocket. He lit one and inhaled deeply, feeling the nicotine ease the weight of his exhaustion. The silence of the early morning was absolute, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves in the nearby trees. It was then that a dry sound reverberated from the side of the truck. A knock. The fright made his heart race. He immediately turned around and walked around the side of the vehicle, hoping to find some explanation. But there was nothing. Just the empty road and the deep darkness around him. He frowned, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was a loose branch or an animal. He forced a smile, trying to dispel the discomfort, and returned to the cabin. It was then that he noticed something out of the ordinary. On the glass inside, someone had scrawled a message with dust-stained fingers. "Do not go any further." His heart raced. He looked around, but the road was still empty. A chill ran down his spine. Who had written that? And when? He had the strange sensation that someone was watching him from the darkness. Swallowing hard, he turned the key in the ignition and accelerated. He didn't want to stay there to find out what that meant. As he drove, his eyes alternated between the road and the rearview mirror, hoping to see something that would justify the warning. Minutes later, something unexpected happened. A huge crash broke the silence of the night. The ground shook, and right in front of him, a huge landslide collapsed onto the road. Rocks, mud, and trees fell in a whirlwind of destruction, obliterating the path. John braked suddenly, feeling the pressure of his seatbelt against his chest. If he hadn't stopped to rest, if he hadn't hesitated when he saw the warning, he would be right there now. He would be dead. His rapid breathing and cold sweat told him that this was no coincidence. But if he hadn't, who had warned him? Or rather, what? Little by little he regained control of his breathing and tried to think rationally. But as much as he tried, he couldn't find any logical explanation for what had just happened. Deep down he knew that, somehow, someone, or something, had saved his life that night. And the road in front of him, now blocked, seemed to whisper the same message as the glass. Do not go any further. It was a dark, moonless night when Paul hit the road. The cargo was valuable, and he needed to arrive before dawn. But as he drove, something seemed wrong. The mileage marker kept rising, but the landscape, deserted and full of dry trees, never changed. Time passed, but he seemed to be stuck on an endless stretch of asphalt and shadows. Until he saw a gas station on the horizon. He stopped to ask for directions, but when he entered the convenience store, he realized it was empty. Not a single living soul. That's when he heard a whisper, "You shouldn't have stopped." The next sound was his truck starting up by itself outside. Paul ran outside, feeling his heart hammering in his chest. The truck was running, the headlights on, but there was no one inside. The air was thick, as if something invisible was pressing him to the ground. He got in the cab, put the car in gear, and accelerated. But no matter how much he drove, the mileage marker kept rising without him feeling like he was moving. Minutes turned into hours. Despair set in. The road was the same, endless, always shrouded in shadows that seemed to move in the corners of the eye. The gas was slowly running out. Then, on the horizon, the same gas station appeared again. Terrified, Roger braked suddenly. His body shook. He had driven for hours, but he was back in the same place? That didn't make sense. He forced himself out of the cab, his steps hesitant on the cold asphalt. The convenience store was still empty. Everything was the same. As if time had folded in on itself. That was when he noticed something different. A sheet of paper scribbled on the counter. His name was written there with a single message, "Keep going, don't look back." Paul's skin crawled. He ran back to the truck and obeyed. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, his hands firmly on the steering wheel. Fear consumed him, but he refused to look in the rearview mirror, ignoring any movement he caught in his peripheral vision. After what seemed like hours, something changed. The landscape began to transform. The shadows receded, the horizon appeared. Suddenly, the truck passed a familiar sign. He was back on the main highway. He looked at the odometer and realized that it finally made sense. Without understanding what had happened, Paul continued on his journey, never telling anyone about that night. But, from time to time, when he looks in the rearview mirror, he has the feeling that something is still watching him from the darkness. Roger was an experienced truck driver, the kind who knew every curve in the road like the back of his hand. He always preferred to drive at dawn when there was less traffic and the journey flowed smoothly. But that night, something different happened. Something he could never explain. It was around 2 in the morning when Luis took a secluded stretch of highway, surrounded by hills and expanses of dense forest. Everything was calm, until a chill ran down his spine for no apparent reason. He looked in the rearview mirror, but all he saw was the empty road and the darkness around him. However, the strange feeling of not being alone remained. A few minutes later, an unexpected weight made the truck sway slightly, as if someone had just climbed into the back of the truck. Roger frowned, adjusted the mirrors, but saw nothing. Even so, the truck seemed to be carrying something extra. It was then that the air inside the cabin changed. The temperature dropped abruptly, and a strange smell, like wet earth mixed with something he couldn't identify, invaded his nostrils. His heart raced. He checked the cabin from one end to the other, but he was alone. The cold increased, making him feel a chill crawl up his neck. The sound of tires on the road echoed irregularly, as if something was interfering with the path. And then the worst came. A whisper. Right next to his ear. Roger's blood ran cold. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone was low, almost as if the voice was trying to say something directly to him. Breathing fast, he increased the speed, trying to ignore the panic that was setting in. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. The reflection in the side window. A dark silhouette sitting in the passenger's seat. He held his breath. The hairs on his arms stood on end. The figure was there, faceless, just an empty, dark presence. Desperation made him swerve the truck slightly to the shoulder, causing the wheels to skid on the loose dirt. But when he looked again, there was nothing. Roger didn't dare stop. He drove without looking to the side again, without checking the mirrors, with only one thought in mind: to get off that road as quickly as possible. It was only when he saw the first signs of civilization that the air inside the cabin seemed to return to normal. The smell disappeared, the temperature rose, and the feeling of presence disappeared. But before ending the trip, he took one last look in the rearview mirror. And there, deep in the back of the truck, the silhouette was still there. Carlo was an experienced truck driver, accustomed to long, lonely journeys and the dangers of poorly lit roads. But that night something seemed different. He felt a strange tightness in his chest, a bad feeling that he couldn't ignore. The load was ordinary, a batch of household appliances, and the destination was a quiet town in the countryside. The route, theoretically, was safe. Still, when he decided to take a shortcut on a less busy road, he felt a chill run down his spine, as if he had crossed an invisible boundary. The lights from the street lights became scarce until they disappeared completely. The only glow came from the truck's headlights, which seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. The GPS blinked a few times before displaying the message "Signal lost." The radio, which had previously been playing some music quietly, began to emit a low static, almost like an incomprehensible whisper. Carlo tried to tune into another station, but all he could hear was a drawn-out, distorted voice that seemed to be murmuring his name. The road stretched out before him in a surreal way. There were no signs, no curves, no intersections. Just a straight line surrounded by tall, twisted trees. When he checked his rearview mirror, he saw something that chilled his blood. A blurry shadow walking along the shoulder, always at the same distance from the truck. He blinked, trying to focus better, but the figure seemed to be shrouded in thick fog, as if it didn't quite belong in this world. Carlo felt a chill on the back of his neck and accelerated. But the shadow remained there, motionless and constant. Time passed strangely, as if he had been driving for hours without moving. That was when he realized that the trees on the side of the road were the same, repeating themselves in impossible patterns. A lump formed in his throat when something worse happened. The hands of the digital clock on the dashboard began to spin uncontrollably, moving forward and backward without any logic. Then a dry, muffled sound came from the roof of the truck. A knock. Then another. As if something was crawling up there. Carlo gripped the steering wheel tightly, cold sweat dripping down his forehead. He couldn't stop. He didn't dare. But the noise continued. Scratches, knocks, a dragging noise that went down the sides of the cabin. Suddenly, the passenger side window began to fog up. Slowly, a handprint appeared there, forming from the inside out. The air fled from Carlo's lungs. His fingers trembled as he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He wasn't alone. It was then that he saw salvation in the distance. A small gas station, an unexpected refuge in the middle of that cursed road. He accelerated, the engine roaring as if he wanted to escape from there too. As soon as he parked, he opened the door and jumped out, his knees shaking. The gas station attendant, a middle-aged man with a tired look, looked at him with an enigmatic half-smile. "Again, ha?" he murmured as if it were something routine. "Another lost man on the road that leads nowhere." Carlo quickly turned around, but what he saw made his stomach turn. The road was no longer there. His truck was still parked where he had left it, but behind him there was only a deep void and impenetrable darkness. There was no sign of the road he had come from, nor of the trees, nor of the shadow that had been chasing him. He turned to the gas station attendant, trying to understand. But before he could ask anything, something in the reflection of the gas station window made his heart stop. Inside, standing behind the counter, there was someone. Or rather, something. A tall, slender, faceless figure. Watching him. The gas station attendant sighed. "You should know by now, some paths once chosen have no return." The world around him seemed to spin. Reality was distorting. Carlo opened his mouth to speak, but his vision went black. When he blinked again, he was inside the truck's cabin. Stopped in the middle of the endless road. The radio whispered his name again. And in the rearview mirror he saw the shadow approaching.